All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us this afternoon. My name's Maureen Conway. I'm the Executive Director of the Economic Opportunities Program here at the Aspen Institute, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our fifth conversation in our Reinventing Low-Wage Work, Ideas that Can Work for Employees, Employers, and the Economy. It's a pretty busy time here in DC post-election, talking about a lot of different things, so thank you so much for choosing this and coming here, and I think you've made a great choice because we really have some terrific speakers for you this afternoon and a really important conversation to have. I also want to make sure I thank our sponsors. I'm really very pleased with the support from the Ford and the Mott Foundation that has made this series possible, and we're really grateful to them for their support and the work they've been doing with us on this series. You have in your materials a couple of things about the previous conversations we've had, and a piece from that Ellen Galinsky and her colleagues have just released, but also out on the materials table are a couple of other pieces, as well as a nice case study of Cascade Engineering, courtesy of actually our colleagues in the Business and Society program here at the Aspen Institute. So sometimes our work is coordinated. And just by way of introduction for this series, I wanted to talk about this conversation. We called this From Jobs to Job Quality. We just came out of an election in which jobs was a very prominent part of the conversation, and sometimes there was a reference and we need good jobs. We need jobs that can support a family. And you know, I was thinking about that as I was looking at this piece from 60 Minutes, and I don't know how many of you saw it over the weekend. 60 Minutes ran a piece on training in manufacturing in Nevada, and they were profiling sort of this training program that was training folks who'd been out of work for jobs in a manufacturing facility, and talking about the kinds of skills, and that these skills can be scarce, and they called it 3 million jobs and who's qualified, and I have some issues with how they use their numbers, but I won't go into that right now. But the thing that struck me at the end was these folks did complete the training program, and 2 of them got full-time jobs at the manufacturer that they were profiling, earning $12 an hour. And you know, I think the 2 folks, they seemed pretty happy with those jobs, that they were getting these jobs that. But I thought about it, you know, so is this what we're talking about when we talk about a good job? Because at the same time, one of the gentlemen is married and has 2 kids, and I thought, well, that family, you know, $12 an hour, they still qualify for food stamps. So, you know, what are we thinking of that is a good job, and what does it really mean to have a good job? So I think that these are really some hard questions, and so that's why I invited other people here to talk about them. So we have a really wonderful panel for you today, and I will just introduce them very briefly, but you have bios in your materials. You can read about their very accomplished background. So right next to me is Javier Murillo, president of the Service Employees International Union's Local 26 in Minneapolis. Let's see who's next to him. Next to him is Fred Keller, Chairman and CEO of Cascade Engineering, and we also have Ellen Galinsky, President and co-founder of the Families and Work Institute. And I'm very pleased that we have my boss and our Executive Vice President for Policy and Public Programs, Elliot Gerson, here to moderate this series. Elliot has been just tremendously supportive of the work of the Economic Opportunities Program and of building this series and bringing it out, and so I'm really pleased that he could make time in what I know is a very busy schedule to come have this conversation with us here today. So thank you, Elliot, and thank you all for being here.
Okay, thank you very much, Maureen. Thank you all for being here, and I'm really thrilled to be part of these conversations. The Economic Opportunity Program has been a long, how long has the program been here?
Oh, it's 20 years, over 20 years.
Over 20 years. It's, you know, the Institute now has almost 30 policy programs, but the Economic Opportunity Program is really the foundation of much of what we do. And now, working around it, we have 4 others directly focused on issues relating to domestic poverty and improving opportunities for employment, particularly for poor people. And then there are probably another half dozen programs here at the Institute that relate directly or indirectly to these critical goals. And as Maureen was alluding, one of the things we're trying to do at the Institute is try to have these programs collaborate and leverage their extraordinary insights into these critical problems that get, frankly, far too less attention in American politics than they deserve. As Maureen said, we just did go through a presidential election, obviously. I can't recall any mention of poverty, which I think is shameful. There certainly was a lot of discussion about jobs. But jobs in the context of, I think, often sort of focus group tested concepts that would target particular segments of the electorate. But clearly there was also a recognition that what we need are not only jobs, but quality jobs. And in some instances, you got a sense of that because of how people would talk about manufacturing jobs, how important it is to restore manufacturing jobs. But it seems to me implicit in that is the question about, well, what about other jobs? Why should there be any jobs that do not allow a family to emerge from poverty? Why does it have to be manufacturing? Why do we countenance so many jobs where people can work extraordinarily hard, yet still have no opportunity to improve their family's economic status? So, you know, the good news is there's a focus on jobs. Not as good is the fact that they're not drilling down to an understanding of the reality of the workplace for so many millions of Americans. And particularly when you consider so much of the American ethos is really that all you need to do is work hard, and if you do work hard, you are assured a place in the middle class and assured an opportunity for your children to have better opportunity than you do yourselves. So what I'm going to do before I open it up to all of you who all have tremendous interest and expertise in this area to engage in a conversation is with our panelists touch on a few different areas. First, on job quality, what job quality really means. Then we'll talk some about job skills. We'll talk also about the role of government. And finally, we'll talk some about business practices. But let's start, and if we can, Ellen, you know, sort of a central issue that Maureen alluded to is you know, the concept of quality. If people do work hard and are willing to work hard, what kind of opportunities are they really going to have? You've been looking at these issues for many, many years. And I wonder if you could just talk to us about the trends that you see in terms of the issues that lower wage workers are facing, and what does make for a quality job that does allow one really to improve one's status, have a middle class lifestyle, have opportunities for their family.
Well, I, like you, was very frustrated by the discussion of jobs during the election without any discussion about how could we create jobs that might work for both the employer and the employee. I felt that way during the welfare reform. It's like, get a job, get any job, and then people would be surprised at the churn or the turnover. We have an advantage at the Families and Work Institute that other people might not have, which is we have an ongoing study of the U.S. workforce. We also have a parallel study of the workplace. We have about 600 data points, and we can go on a fishing expedition to try to define what a good job is and keep looking at it over time. And by a good job, we look at what are the characteristics of a job that are related to things that matter to employers, like retention, like engagement, like job satisfaction, and what are the things that matter to employees, like your well-being, your health, you know, those sorts of things. And so we've just looked at it. We're actually releasing with you all today, thanks to the Ford Foundation, a shorter version of 2 papers that we've been working on. And in these papers, we've defined what are the characteristics. And first, we have to say that economic security is critical. In this particular paper, we defined economic security by having access to things like paid health care and for yourself or for your family and some contribution to your benefits plan. It's also other things as well, but this is how we defined it in this paper. Having some say over how to do your job is important. Having an opportunity to learn on the job, because it can be any kind of job. but if it doesn't give you learning opportunities on the job itself, and then we think for the low-wage workforce, access to paid on-the-job training that's relevant and education. Those things are really important. And then a supervisor who supports you succeeding in the job. It's always the people, it's always the relationships, stupid, that matter the most. And so it's coworker support, it's supervisor support for succeeding on the job, and also managing your work and personal life, and then flexibility. And one of the trends that we see is an increasing flexibility that works on behalf of employers but not employees, that people are stuck in what I think of as a part-time ghetto. And in our particular national study data, we find that 41% of low-income workers are working part-time, and 61% want more time. That's one trend. We define flexibility by, in this particular paper, 16 different aspects, but it includes paid time for your own illness, and paid time for your child's illness, and vacation days and holidays, and part-time, where if you're in part-time you can move to a full-time job, and if you're in a full-time job you can move part-time. That is, it's the real choice. Flexibility has to work for the employer and employee, and we find when low income employees have access to this kind of good quality job, regardless of whatever industry they work in, they're much more likely to be engaged in better health and mental health. So it actually begins to level the playing field in ways that are part of that American dream.
Fred, you run a globally competitive business, and obviously you need to compete with all other businesses, regardless of what kind of personnel and employment practices they have. Tell us a little bit about your business, and do you think the kinds of things Ellen described are, reasonable conditions for quality work?
Yeah, thanks very much for the opportunity. Cascade Engineering is a company that has about a little over 1,000 employees. I started the company about 40 years ago. I was very young. We've got plants in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in Ohio, North Carolina, Texas, and in Budapest, Hungary. And we are in as you say, a globally competitive marketplace. In some respects, the marketplace drives a lot of our thinking in terms of how we are able to pay our employees. On the other hand, we can do a lot with culture, and I was really glad to hear you bring that up, Ellen. I think that's very much a part of it. We have about a third of our employees that actually are involved with the product of manufacturing, and the rest are indirect, we would say, or not directly involved in the product, and that provides a career opportunity. So we like to think in terms of people coming into the organization and having career opportunities within the organization. So not just a job, but a career. And we've done, one of the subjects in the paper is our Welfare to Career program, where we've learned over the years, about 15 years ago, we started thinking about this process of how do we appropriately and successfully employ people and retain them that are coming from poverty. And we learned this whole system of support that's needed for that to happen effectively. And that system of support is not only important for us as an organization. I mean, when you're able to do something like that, when you're able to successfully retain, we retain at 97% plus per month in terms of welfare recipients. Prior to that, it was in the 40s and 50s. But we've learned that by providing supports, we're able to have a work environment where people want to stay, and they are able to stay, and we're able to help them remove the barriers that are confronting them. Because when you move from welfare to a full-time job, there are lots of barriers. There are lots of new things that have to be learned. So we found that that's not only good for them, but it's good for the organization, because if we take care of those folks who are in most need, it really reflects on the rest of the organization. And there's a little self-interest there, but I like to think of this whole thing as finding something good to do and figuring out how to make it good business. Because if you do, then you've got something unique, and beneficial for all parties involved. So yeah, I think it's very much involved in the culture side as well. We do a fair amount of work in trying to create a safe work environment for us to have conversations about race and racism. We are very involved in that. We have declared ourselves to be an anti-racism organization. That takes work. We work at that a lot and try to have that safe environment where we can understand the issues and work at it. We are a certified B Corporation, that stands for Benefit Corporation. We work at the environmental side, but kind of a triple bottom line approach, so not only profits but also benefiting the earth and society. And so we call our headquarters building the learning community. You're either there to teach or learn. And that learning community is LEED Platinum certified. So we work at all of these angles, and it's a sense of pride for the organization.
From what you say, I wish you had 200,000 employees and not just 1,000.
I'm working on it.
Maybe we can look forward to that.
Keep growing.
Javier, you work in different kinds of industries, and obviously from a very different perspective, and in an organizing context. Just tell us about your experience with this notion of quality and just how difficult it actually has become for American workers to get quality jobs.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm the president of a property services local in Minnesota. We represent janitors, security officers, window cleaners, about 6,000 workers, and we're a completely private sector and service sector work. And I guess sort of sharing sort of the frustration about how we've talked about jobs in the political campaigns, but even more generally, that when we talk about good jobs, that there's often, it seems to me, an accepted assumption that there should be jobs that aren't good, that are just, that are going to be poverty, that someone, rather, I think we should challenge the assumption that, should we say, if someone is working 40 hours a week, shouldn't, at whatever job, that person be able to not live in poverty. And in the work that we do, so we actually are entering into contract negotiations. I have a big contract convention this weekend with all of our members. But we're also working with, in the janitorial side, with a worker center that organizes workers in retail cleaning, which is largely non-union, and we're organizing workers who work at airports in subcontracted work. So, in the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport, if you work inside the building, you're a union janitor, or if you work at say Target headquarters in their corporate offices, the janitors who work in those jobs make close to $15 an hour, have health care benefits, have paid vacation, and such, and they're not wealthy, but they, and that's true of the folks working inside the airport as well. If you do the same job cleaning inside an airplane, you make minimum wage and work largely part-time hours, no benefits whatsoever. Target headquartered, you have health care benefits, you have a decent wage. If you work in the retail store as a janitor, you make $7.75 an hour, maybe $8 an hour, absolutely no benefits. Same work. And interestingly, just because of the way that these industries work, our members often, sometimes their second job is working inside a Target store, or have family members that come from the same communities. It's a largely immigrant workforce. And the difference, of course, is that, and to me, a key component of when we talk about what we need to do in reinventing low-wage work, is that if the empowerment of workers is not at the center of the conversation, that we will just sort of continue the problems as we have. You mentioned, Ellen, sort of having a voice on the job, but that the difference between those two work sites, inside Target and inside the Target headquarters and the store, is that workers have a union and a contract, and there are requirements for full-time work. I think what we are seeing sort of nationally and globally, really, look at the work of Saket Soni, the National Guest Workers Alliance. They've done work looking at the Walmart chain, the sort of the different layers of subcontracting, and how a large corporation like Walmart will, subcontract to a subcontractor to a subcontractor to a subcontractor, and then organize, and in their organizing work, these workers, they call Walmart the employer, because it's very important to make the connection and to hold the corporation accountable for the work that the subcontractor does. I think what we are faced with in our industry and our current contract campaign in Minnesota, it's about, are we going to be a part of an economy that is moving increasingly toward that subcontracting, increasingly toward part-timing work, or are we going to move forward? What we've done is, we moved our janitorial industry from mostly part-time to now mostly full-time, but that's done because workers almost went on strike and fought for that and won it in a contract. And if we don't have that kind of empowerment as a barrier to those outside forces that lead to part-timing, it will just continue on that path.
Let's turn now for a few minutes to the question of skills and getting the necessary skills. We again hear a lot about education and its importance. We have a program here at the Aspen Institute we're very proud of, dealing with community colleges in particular and assuring that they do a better job of working with local industry to make sure that the skills that the students are getting are going to lead to good jobs. You all have experiences in your own perspective, in your own work, about helping workers improve skills. Fred, why don't we begin with you here? And I know that skills development is an important regional strategy in the Grand Rapids area, and I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about what you've learned in that experience and what really works. I mean, that's what we want to understand.
Yeah, thanks for that. About 8 years ago, anybody in the Department of Labor, Wired grant was bestowed on West Michigan, and that started us thinking about lots of innovations. Workforce Innovations for Regional Economic Development was the title of that grant. That was certainly helpful to get us going. Out of that, we said that's a 3-year grant. So what do you do after the grant? Is always the question. And what came out of that is what we are now titling Talent 2025. And this is an effort where we are taking our 13-county region of West Michigan and aspiring to be a top 20 regional talent pool globally. That's our aspiration.
That's a good one.
That's a good one, I think, right? It's one that you say, well, why would West Michigan? Well, we've got a lot of assets, and we've got a lot of things that we can work on, but it is this particular group called Talent 2025 doesn't do anything. All we do is we say we illuminate, we evaluate, and we advocate. And it's really an unlikely group. It's actually a group of 75 CEOs. Now, CEO is a 4-letter word in some circles, but this is actually a wonderful group. Represents about 15% of the people that are working in the region. And we do nothing more than we do all within Talent 2025, we do all the research to what's our current condition, where is our trajectory, what's it look like, what's our needs, and so on. And we're finding some very interesting things. I could talk for half an hour, so I won't do that. But it's really exciting about what we're doing. And if you want to bring up anything in the Q&A, we can do that. But the role of the CEOs in this case is to be accountability partners with various sectors of the education and the talent system. So, for instance, we convened the 13 college and university presidents and asked them, you've got some problems with persistence and graduation rates, what are you doing about it, and what can you do about it? They came up, within 3 months, they came up with a program of reverse articulation where they're granting associate's degrees as soon as a student that went from a 2-year to a 4-year institution achieves the accreditation, the two-year institution can grant them an associate's degree, things like that. So this is it's a very exciting kind of new way to think. It came out of the DOL grant. We're excited about something like that. Internally, I mentioned that at Cascade, we've been working at this idea of welfare to career, and that has spread now to another group, and we can talk about that in a minute as well. But it's been fun to think about how
Talk about it
thinking
now.
about
We'd
talent.
love to hear examples of things
Well,
that actually work.
Well, this is a program called The Source, and it's 19 businesses that have been basically replicating what we've been doing at Cascade Engineering in terms of welfare to career. They now have over 600 welfare recipients, former welfare recipients that are working, retaining them at the same 97% plus rate. And it's a real public-private partnership because we've got DHS social workers actually in the factories or in the businesses where they're helping remove the barriers with all the force that they can do, all the programming they can bring to that, and helping them stay on the job. As our social worker likes to say, I love my job. I'd much rather be working, keeping people on the job than dealing with the effects of not having a job. So that's another example of what we're doing from a regional standpoint.
Doesn't the Source help people move up the career ladder too?
Absolutely.
So that employers are working together so that you can start in one kind of job, but then begin to move to a little bit more of an advanced job? That's what I've always loved about it.
Yeah, it's actually, there's a cooperation there. If there are openings available in one of the other Source organizations, they're very willing to have them leave one Source organization and go to another as they advance their careers.
Javier, you obviously spend a lot of time working with members to provide them with better skills. I wonder, just talk to us about your experience and things that that work to help allow them to get the opportunities to improve their skills and get better jobs.
So I think to this, I'd say one of the things that is often missing when we talk about innovation in the workplace or changes, and especially that workers actually being in on the front end in discussions of changes, and this was something we dealt with a lot and talked about a lot 3 years ago when we were negotiating the janitorial contract, where we're knowing that there's a trend in the cleaning industry to move to greener practices, to move to day shift cleaning so that building lights are not on at night, and it provides cost savings, but also and is better for the environment. But the way it was happening in some instances, we had an example of a building that went to day shift cleaning, where the office workers got notice 6 weeks in advance of the shift, of the change to day shift cleaning, emails that we're going to be moving to this, and there will be different practices, and you'll see the janitors during the day, et cetera, et cetera. The janitors were given 1 week notice and told next week you guys will be now working day, which is a abrupt change to make. You have child care decisions, all these things you have to do. And they were given an English test. Say, well, you're going to have to interact with customers now. So if you don't speak English well, we'll have to move you to another building. And what we did in our last contract negotiations was actually put the question of green cleaning and day shift cleaning on the forefront. It's very important to me that very often unions are perceived of as sort of standing in the way of innovation or of any kind of change. And what we're saying is this is wonderful. In many instances, they're very day shift cleaning can be very family-friendly hours, but it needs to be done in a way where workers are a part of the front end. There are all sorts of ways of training workers in day shift cleaning that don't require English. Actually, you do signs and you just have to get everyone, the office workers and the janitors, on the same page about how so the work can be done well. But to me, that was it was incredibly important for us to to put this on the table, to say we don't want to stand in the way of innovation. We want to be a part of it. We want to be trained, and that's an example as well of, like, in our local in New York, Local 32 BJ, they've done incredible work in the areas of green innovations and cleaning, to provide career ladders for people who go from being a janitor to a LEED certified supervisor who can do inspections in a building for energy efficiencies, things like that. So we can, if workers are a part of the discussion from the beginning, this can work very well. If it's something that's we just sort of say, here, this is great. It's great for everyone. An innovation like green cleaning can be absolutely a win-win for everyone if people don't forget that you can't, do something like give someone a few days' notice to make a radical transformation of their life and schedule.
Ellen, what about the problems that workers face, because it's sometimes very difficult to gain skills or get further education while working? It's one of these catch-22s. So, what ideas do you have about how skill development, training, education could be better supported?
We actually asked that question of the American Community Survey. It was a report that we were doing with Corporate Voices for the Gates Foundation, where we took 16 to 26-year-olds and we looked at what was happening to them and what was the difference between people who were staying in school versus people who weren't. And what we found, also looking at our own data from the National Study of the Changing Workforce, what we found is that the people who are more likely to stay in school have there's their culture that Fred was talking about, but have employers who support learning and training. So there has to be a culture of support for developing yourself, for moving on, for gaining skills. And they have flexibility, and not the flexibility that is only for the worker, but for the employer, but flexibility that is for the employee and the employer. So they had more ability to change their start and stop times and that sort of thing. I actually, though, want to say something else when we think about the whole issue of education and training, because we focus a lot on content, the kinds of things that you need to know. But having spent 11 years looking at the research on how kids learn by going out and actually filming the best studies of cognitive science, neuroscience, and so forth, I've become very passionate about the notion of executive function skills, and I think we have to start those early. If we think about training for the workforce, we have to be thinking about those with...
What are they?
Executive functions skills turn out to be more predictive of life success than your IQ. And they are the ability to pay attention, to focus, the ability to have a working memory, remember all the things that you're supposed to do, to be flexible because changing times require flexibility, but not to go on automatic, but do what you need to do to achieve a goal. So executive functions are always in pursuit of a goal, and probably a good example is the famous marshmallow test, where the kids who could sit there and wait for 15 minutes for 2 marshmallows versus 1 marshmallow. And you think about that, that's all of those skills are a part of that, and those kids, now in their 40s, did better later on, and that's just one of hundreds of kinds of studies. But we can promote those skills both in the adult. I think it's one of the important ways to reduce the achievement gap and to begin to break the cycle of poverty, so that we need to help adults learn them in their own lives, and we need to help teachers teach those to children, starting with very young children. And I think we need to teach them to adults. You talked about having clear discussions about racism. And for me, that's learning perspective taking, to learn to see how someone else would see the world. And that requires executive function, because you have to put your own opinions on hold to see how someone else might see something. So I just think that we need to, when we think about the 21st century and how it's different from the 20th century, and we talk about 21st century skills, to me, among the most important things that we can promote across the age cycle, because it's going to affect aging too, is to promote executive function skills. Okay, that's my soapbox. I have one too.
Well, it's important to be on a soapbox. Let's transition again and talk a little bit about government role, whether it's safety net kind of a role or regulatory role. And Ellen, let's keep you on the soapbox for a minute.
Okay, I've got one here too.
And we often think of the government role as mainly in the context of safety net programs for people who don't work, but there are also important roles for people who do work and want to change the nature of their work, that where they're not earning enough or they don't have benefits or whatever the situation may be. Could you just talk to us a little bit about how programs can actually support those who are already working and support working families, or how they can become even more effective than what they are?
We have a lot of programs. They're community-based programs, they're state programs, they're government programs that help people with heating and eyeglasses and foods and earned income tax credit and WIC and a million things that are out there that are not actually being used very much. And so we, with the Ford Foundation, set out on a challenge to see whether we could increase work supports, that is, people that help people get to work and manage the transportation and manage the child care and those sorts of things, working through their employer, because they get benefits already through their employer. So we funded 9 projects around the country to see whether they could use the work supports that were already available in their communities, and by working through the employer. And it was, we have a paper that we're also releasing today called the Supporting Work Project. But what we found there was we reached 300,000 employees in 9 different communities. You can do this. It's hard work though, because people have to become, I want to say trilingual. You have to be able to see because there's so many barriers to using these programs. There are hours when people are working. There's a lot of forms. They're set up in a non-trust system, for obvious reasons of abuse. And so you have to help the government and employers and the agencies, the community-based organizations, learn to understand each other's language and work together. And such simple things like calling people low income didn't work. Calling them thrifty did work. Sort of applying behavioral economics, psychology to how to help people use the programs. All those, people thought there was a one-size-fits-all. You can put out one brochure and everyone will come. You can build it, they'll come. No, they didn't come. There were such simple, obvious lessons, but they were very learnable. And I think it's an important thing for community-based organizations to begin to tap into the employers like your group in your community, or the unions in their community, to take advantage, particularly in such a tough economic time, of the programs that are out there that can really help people and aren't fully being utilized.
Fred, you've talked already about Source. From a business perspective, what can you say about the optimal role of government as your partner in trying to improve these circumstances?
How much time do we have? It's a huge issue in terms of how we go about the process of making improvements. And the conclusion, the tentative conclusion I've got on all this is that we really have to reverse the process of problem solving from a top-down federal government, state government, local to local, informing the state, informing the federal government. And I really believe that's fundamental to us making any kind of significant improvement in this area. In the example of the Source, for instance, I think that could inform policy from the standpoint of how you go about encouraging employers to do this thing, which is obviously a pretty good thing to do. We're demonstrating some pretty good successes here, but it's all on their own dollar, if you will. And now, why are they still doing that? It makes some sense. There's we certainly pitched to the employers that there's a return on their investment, and there is. You can look at probably 5 to 10 times of the investment they put in, but they're paying for the social worker to be there. They actually pay half of the salary of the social worker. They agree to do that. They are paying for educational programs. They're paying for these things that in other countries, we have to face it, we're competing with other countries. They provide all of that and then some. And so we're faced with policy that in this case is probably doubling up, costing more than in other countries where it would be much less than that. So I think we need to think fundamentally differently about how we inform government policy.
And Javier, another aspect of government policy, of course, is simply enforcing the law. And there are all kinds of laws, whether it's minimum wage or wage an hour or workplace safety or child labor. And then you talked earlier about the fundamental problem was an additional fundamental problem being simply that there are lots of wages that don't allow one to emerge from poverty. Just from a government legal perspective, the laws that are enforced, that aren't enforced, or that could be enacted, what do you think are some of the most important things that either could be done that are not being done, even though the law requires it, or that laws could be changed to effect?
Well, so I come at this question from a perspective of working in an industry that is largely immigrant. And when you look at the question of law there, that you have conflicting laws, or laws that that right now our system encourage, like we should have I guess I'd say we should have laws that encourage good corporate behavior and discourage bad. And with the situation with our immigration laws, that's exactly reversed. So at SEIU, the labor movement in general has moved dramatically on the question of immigrant rights in the last 20 years, from a position of xenophobia to advocating for immigration reform. And why is that? Is because what do we do when we organize workers and win contracts? We are raising the floor on wages and benefits in a given market. And if there exists anyone who, for any reason, can exist below that floor, that's bad for everyone. That's bad for all workers. What we have is right now is, because there's fear in the immigrant community, and very often not. The reality is that whether you are undocumented or not, if you have a right to be paid for work that you should be paid for work that you do, and your employer cannot, has to obey OSHA laws and et cetera, et cetera. But we basically encourage people to go underground right now in order to avoid these laws, these regulations. I think that in recent years, our direct experience of this, under the current administration, there was a sense that we would do things differently, and we had very big dramatic raids on workplaces under the Bush administration. They moved to a system of I-9 audits, where the Immigration and Customs Enforcement goes into an employer and they check I-9s of their workers. And this is sort of I think, seen as a kinder, gentler way of immigration enforcement. But what happens to those workers? So they're not deported. They're no longer employed. In our case, where this happened to us, we lost 1,500 members in the last 4 years through these. The workers don't leave Minnesota. They just go from a job where they are making good wages and they had health care benefits to employers that pay them in cash and are sometimes below minimum wage. So we actually just sort of are moving people more toward the bad apple employers that we want to discourage from even existing. And so, to me, this question of solving this problem of our immigration laws is just fundamental, not just for immigrant workers, but for all workers, because there is that downward pressure that's created by those who exploit our broken immigration system for a profit.
you talked about bad apple employers. Let's just shift again a little bit to employers. Employers' practices, as we've certainly seen from the exemplary practices that Fred's pioneered, practices make a huge difference. And whether sometimes we hear about high road, low road kind of employers, bad apple, whatever. Can you give us any experience you've had working, organizing, promoting a particular business and to transform them from a low road employer to a high road employer?
Well, I mean, I think a labor management relationship should always work toward that goal, right? That in the example I gave before, the difference in the commercial cleaning industry versus retail. You in the retail cleaning industry, it's not uncommon, for example, for a worker to clean a department store, arrive work at night, they're locked in the store all night, let out 6 a.m, but paid for 5 hours of work because they're told, well, it's not a big store, so it won't take you that long. So locked in the store. I met a person who this was the case for them. What we are doing in Minnesota is partnering with a worker center that is working in the retail cleaning industry to raise standards there, because we have the ironic situation that our employers in the commercial cleaning industry don't even want that work because it pays so badly, the retail industry. But what their work, they have actually consolidated a lot of the retail cleaning so that it's now mostly done by one contractor, and now we are organizing that workforce. I think very often it looks to people, there's an assumption that especially when it comes to unions, yes, we disagree with our employers at times, contract negotiations and such, but that a good employer to me is one that is in dialogue with its workforce, and that in our case that is about the process of negotiating a contract, and then once that is settled, you are partners in protecting standards. We had a big, almost went to strike 6-7 years ago, and at the end it was very acrimonious. And at the end of it, one of our employers said to me, "No one else will say this to you, but thank you, for making such a big, public deal about this, because I'm going to be able to charge the highest rates I've charged in years, because they can go to their clients and be like, well, that union's crazy, we gotta, and so." An example of let's be on the same page, because our members got a raise and he got to charge more. But.
Ellen, you've been working on issues relating to employer practices in the workplace for a long time, and you've already talked about your particular interest in flexibility. And I think for many of us who are fortunate enough to work in professional environments, the concept of flexibility is easy to understand, and most employers seem to have a reasonably easy time, or maybe not easy, but an easier time offering flexibility. But in the low-wage context, it means entirely different things. And you just talk to us about that a bit.
No, you're right. We do a nationally representative study of the workplaces, and so we've been able to track trends now for about since 1998. And we used to think of the ideal employer as someone who was, the organization man, and sort of work-centric and worked 9 to 5 and had no other life. And I guess you could if you work 9 to 5, but what we've seen is, so the ideal worker was kind of the prevailing norm, and what we've seen is that we've had to become more flexible, like it or not, because work is with technology is 24/7 for many people. You can work anytime, anywhere, or every time, everywhere, and we're global. So even if you aren't in a global company, you're affected by the global economy, and it's very fast-paced and competitive. And for all of those reasons, we've had to become more flexible. but our data show that employers have become more flexible around, the flexibility is much more likely to be offered for that ideal worker, someone who's better educated, someone who's in a managerial position, someone, the low wage or low income workforce has much less access. And we've seen flexibility increase around full-time work, but not around any time of reduced time or time away or leave or any of those sorts of things. So, I mean, the marching orders are pretty clear of what we need to do. We try, though, to increase the number of good apples, I guess that's one way to say it, through a project that started with the Sloan Foundation and now we're partnering with SHRM to do. Is Cassidy here? Yeah, oh, sorry. Look right in front of me. My partner at SHRM, we have a project together now called When Work Works, and the idea, we're going out to all 50 states by 2014, and poor baby, she's on the road all the time. I'm glad you're in Washington today. But there is that much interest among employers, and we take a place-based kind of an approach. We work with communities. We work with communities to have them do education and outreach about what these characteristics of effective and flexible workplaces are, and do media outreach and educational events, and then we give an award. And we actually can trust the award because 2/3 of the winning score comes from employees. There's your listening to employees part of it, and it's around not just flexibility, but it's around effective, as I've defined it before, workplaces. And so for today, we pulled together some examples of employers of low wage or low income employees who are doing good things. Some are unionized, some aren't. Some are small, some are mid-sized, some are large. They're in all kinds of different industries, but they actually do listen to employees. I do think that's people used to figure out how to make it work under the table, and if you just ask them, they have really good ideas. So a company called 1-800-CONTACTS, which is a mail order for contact lenses company that's based in Utah. We're having huge problems with turnover and absenteeism, and they had the proverbial suggestion box kind of notion. They ask employees, and the employees created a point system so that if you could schedule your absences in advance, or you got more points toward more time off, and absenteeism, and they created all different kinds of flexibility schedules that work. And United Airlines, in this little handout that we have, is another example in its call center, reservation center in Houston, where they have a tool where employees can take charge of their own schedules and swap schedules, and you can also apply for education and training that way. So it's kind of, the principle is it has to work for the employer and the employee from our point of view, and listen to the employees, because they not only can help figure out how to build better cars, but they have good ideas for how to make work better. So that's here's the report that we do with SHRM every year. It's sort of the Zagat's of good places to work, and hopefully it's going to get fatter and fatter and fatter. We've had about 2,000 winners so far.
Oh, Fred, you probably ought to get the last word on business practices, but let's stay in the context of government and what government can do. Let's just, for the sake of argument, assume that not all employers are as progressive as you are. I know that's probably an unrealistic assumption, but let's just assume that for a minute, and that government incentives are necessary to make a difference. Can you talk to us a little bit about what incentives, might help, might work, and also perhaps what incentives or regulations actually can be counterproductive? I know Maureen had mentioned to me, for example, there's some sick leave regulations, I think now, that some say involve so much record keeping that it actually interferes with the goal. But just tell us a little bit about, from your perspective, what kind of government incentives are in fact important and targeted and don't create more inefficiency than efficiency.
Boy, you ask these probing questions. These are wonderful. Actually, from a regulation standpoint, I am not necessarily a fan of more regulation. I mean, and when you're in the business world, you're always looking over your shoulder, trying to figure out what's that next regulation I got to comply with, and it's not necessarily a fun thing to try to figure that all out, and knowing you're at risk of falling afoul of that sort of thing. We like to think in terms of, by the way, I did an article on me in Inc. magazine last year, and they had under my picture, they put this little banner that said, "Regulate me." And the gist of the article was that I wasn't unfavorable of regulation, but I never said that. But the fact is that some regulation is good. I mean, the safety regulation is a good example of that. You just need to have good common sense safety regulation. We think in terms of beyond compliance. This is not something you want to just kind of skim along the minimums. You want to be able to be way beyond that, and it's good for business. It's good for us to be thinking about. I mean, nobody wants to send an employee home damaged somehow. I mean, that's just not something you want to do. And if you do, it costs money. So why would you do that? I mean, there's all kinds of good reasons for that sort of thing. So from a regulation standpoint, I think that there certainly are good regulations, and I'm not one of these that wants to throw all regulation out, but it does get in the way sometimes. And part of this is again this globally competitive work. I can't overemphasize that, especially from the manufacturing work standpoint. I mean, it's breathtaking how interconnected we are today from the standpoint of our global competition. It's
Presumably that's why you have a plant in Hungary.
Well, that's part of it, yes. That's another story. But yes. But Greece has a little problem, and Europe catches a cold, and China slows down, and we slow down. I mean, it's just amazing how this is all interconnected. And so we're still, in manufacturing, we're still under threat of losing more jobs, more of our business to other low-wage countries, and it's a constant thing we need to battle. So I don't think there isn't any one single approach to this. We need to be problem-solving this through. But if I was to imagine something positive, some sort of positive regulation, it would be. I don't think you incentivize employers. I don't think that holding a carrot out there and say you can if you do this you'll get that. I don't think that necessarily works. I do think that there are ways to think in terms of perhaps the reward would be the easier way to say that. If certain things are achieved, it will be you'll be receiving something in exchange for that from a cost basis. I don't think anybody's looking for some sort of a methodology that says if we have the right policy in place, you'll get all these lemmings following this policy. Having said that, I do think there are ways to put in place rewards for those who do a good job.
Well, I'm going to turn it over to the audience here in a minute, but before I do that, maybe I'll just ask each of you, if you care to just make one recommendation, and you can choose to whom you want to make it. As Maureen said, we've just had a presidential election, but as you said, Fred, maybe some of these issues are best addressed at the local level, so you can have your choice. You're going to make a recommendation to your newly elected mayor, your newly elected governor, or the newly elected president. What is one thing, the highest priority that you would give for improving the low-wage work problem? Javier? Probably something to do with union organizing.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'd go back to what it said at the beginning, that my challenge to us and to our president and everyone would be to say, shouldn't we think of this as that the floor is that people should be able to work 40 hours a week who want to work 40 hours a week, and if you work 40 hours a week, you should not live in poverty and should have a job that gives you a life of dignity. It seems simple, but we are very, very far from that reality. And much of the conversation that we have about good jobs actually seems to reinforce the notion that there will be jobs that you will have that will not provide that for you. And I think that that's a mistake. And I think that when we see the industries that we organize in, that our members work in, that jobs that others consider terrible jobs can become good jobs when workers are empowered to improve the standards in that industry.
Fred?
Yeah, I think the message I would have is the unit of change is the community, and that we should look at more policy that encourages that. When we look at, you talk about our mayor, in West Michigan, in our 13 counties, we have 100 units of government. Which mayor, which person? I've been studying this issue of how do you make change in a community when no one's in charge, basically. There's no one in charge in the community. So how do you do that? How do you go about that process? Fascinating things. And I think that what we need is enabling legislation as opposed to restrictive legislation. We need enabling things that can allow the communities to spend the dollars that they would otherwise send somewhere else, or maybe that comes back, but at least it's allowing them to make decisions. Simple things like, where could you spend your WIB dollars, your Workforce Investment Board dollars, in training, or would you do that in some way to be able to prevent some of the things that are happening as a result of people not having jobs? So, where could that community better spend their dollars? It would be the issue for me.
Ellen, you have the last word.
Well, I actually gave children in a study a wish for their parents. I asked children, so you gave me a wish, so I'll go to what the children said. I asked children, if you had one wish that could improve the way your mother's or your father's work affects your life, what would that wish be? What do you all think kids might wish? More time. Yeah, we asked a representative sample of adults what they thought kids would wish, and most of them said more time. That's not what kids wished. Any other guesses?
More money?
What?
More money?
Well, that was the second wish. More time was third.
How about pride in their work?
Happier. Well, the reverse of that, I'll tell you. The largest proportion of kids wish that their parents were less tired and stressed. Mm-hmm. And yeah, most of us don't think about it. So if I have one wish, and I know from our national studies of the U.S. workforce that the health of the American workforce is going down. We have a situation, particularly among men, interestingly enough, men's health has gone down the most dramatically. And men usually don't self-report poor health, so this is probably worse than what our self-report studies show. What I would hope, we have people who are underemployed and overemployed. We have overwork has become a word now. I wish that we would tackle the whole issue of how we work these days, because I think we think we can't, but we actually can work more effectively and be more productive. And so the president in March 2010 had a forum on workplace flexibility that started a very interesting dialogue among people who don't usually talk to each other. Employers of low-wage workers, union organizers, employers of professional workers, researchers, et cetera. I would like to see that kind of forum repeated at the White House that got a little bit even bigger megaphone, but we also tackle in there the way we work today so that we can healthcare is expensive. We all know that's a huge problem that we're struggling with. We've got to figure out how to work in ways so that the kids have a different wish for us.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a microphone, and if you can just give us your name and affiliation very quickly in a short question, so we'll have time for as many as we can. Yes, the gentleman on the aisle.
Hi. My name is Sam Lakin from Prosperity Projects. This is for Mr. Keller. I had the opportunity a few years ago to work with the West Michigan Strategic Alliance on the Wired grant.
Yep.
It's very impressive what they were able to do, as you point out, with really no jurisdictional authority to be able to do it. Currently, I'm working on a project in 10 labor markets around the country dealing with the issues of growth and opportunity. And I heard you talk about some of the activities going on in West Michigan. What is it, do you think, that are the most effective things that can be done on a regional level. And there's plenty on the national level, minimum wage laws, family leave, et cetera. What on the regional level can be done to deal with these quality of work issues and scarcity of work issues?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's what we're trying to address in our Talent 2025, frankly. What we've learned is that the employers are not doing a good job of telegraphing needs. That's a good start. And then the educational side is not good at necessarily wanting to know that information and doing anything with it. So that's a big part of it. So dealing with the educational needs of the community. And we learn that this is one of those things that you get a little better, more skilled workforce, you get a little more better jobs coming in, more skilled workforce, better jobs, and that's a ratcheting up kind of thing as opposed to waiting for this flyby business to come in town and you're going to get all these new jobs and then you're going to educate people for them. So it really is that's part of it. But so thinking in terms of how we can understand better what our current trajectory is, what our current needs are, and how that's going to grow and where it's going to grow, and then educating to that. And then the workforce training portions are often very disconnected. We're just working on that right now in West Michigan, so that the workforce training is more involved with what do you want to learn as opposed to what job is available. It sounds simple, but it's not being done. And so how do we connect those issues? So there's a lot of nuts and bolts that can be done, I think, in that area. But it's long-term has to be a community understanding of what its future could be. I think without a vision, an understanding of what that community could be doing, where they could be going, and having some real energy and understanding of that, I think it's very hard to have any kind of workforce development taking place.
Next question. Woman on the aisle.
Thank you. My name is Edad Mercier with Wider Opportunities for Women. And at WOW, we run an initiative called Women in Work. And that initiative works with community organizations and other community-based initiatives to help women transition into non-traditional careers such as construction and manufacturing. And one of the issues that we consistently encounter is how the role of one-stop career centers, and essentially how frontline workers within one-stop career centers, how they're engaging with the workforce, and how they're funneling specifically female workers into different careers that may not provide employer-based benefits, et cetera. So I was wondering if the panel could maybe discuss the role of one-stop career centers and how much, what the impact of that is on the labor force and particularly training in terms of the workers.
Yeah.
Who would like to take that?
I'm not deeply into one-stops, so I can. Sounds like a structural issue more than. But go ahead, anybody.
I mean, I think we keep talking about the mismatches all the way along, and you just talked about a mismatch between education and the jobs that are there, and you're talking about a mismatch there. I guess my question comes back to Fred saying that you've got real leadership in your community to be able to move ahead, but that didn't just happen. I mean, so how do you, if you believe in this bottom up that could make the one-stops more effective, for example, in a community, et cetera, how would you nurture and create that leadership that's going to make because we've also all seen communities that are disasters. So what do we need to do to create that kind of leadership where the agencies in an organization can work together? We worked with One Stops in our supporting work project, and often there was a real disconnect between working with employers, we found too. So.
Yeah, and I'll try to bring into a little bit of what you're talking about. But I do think that we underestimate the ability of business leaders to contribute to to the solutions of these problems. And I call it the heart-head dilemma. Most leaders in business have a heart-head dilemma. The heart says, let's do the right thing. The head says, hey, we got a business to run. We got a payroll to make. We got to make sure we survive. And I think that we need to engage that dilemma as opposed to putting them in a box. And I think that's probably one of the biggest opportunities that you can have here to engage the leaders. Now, specifically in terms of women in non-traditional jobs, I think that is something that there's got to be some structural roots there that people are just kind of stereotyping, and they're not doing there's not good training that's being done. There's somehow that's not being addressed, and seems to me that could be that's one of those where you have some dialogue, people understand it. We don't put people in. We don't create camps. We've just way too much putting people in assuming that they are going to think a particular way because of their position. We have a lot of positional assumptions going on. So I would encourage more community dialogue on that.
In the back row.
Hi, my name is Michaelia Davis. I'm an associate with the Ascend program. We're another program here that Elliot mentioned before that works on some of these issues. This is a question for Fred. Can you share some of the insights you've gained around the source? You talked about the 19 companies that are involved in that. How and what has worked well in terms of engaging the private sector, as you just mentioned, to partner on some of these issues?
Yeah. I think this goes back to the very first meeting we had with. We had about 10 or 12 employers in a room, and there was a fair amount of crossed arms and stiff faces, like, you want to do what? And it really it took a single guy that was very involved in that Mark Peters, the head of Butterball Farms, was just absolutely on fire to make sure this was going to happen. So you do need to find the right. You need to find the right leaders. They exist. I believe they exist in every community. We've been invited in. We do a little consulting work within Cascade Engineering. We try to help with this thing. But there are business leaders that are willing to step out. It's an uncomfortable zone for most, but they're there. There's no question that they're there, and I think we just have to engage it and embrace it.
One organization that we worked with in the Supporting Work Project was Step Up Savannah, and I don't know whether any of you all know Step Up Savannah, but it's a community. It comes out of the Chamber of Commerce in Savannah, and it's also a person on fire, and then a mayor, and then a second mayor on fire. They actually followed through with what the other one did. But what they've realized is that they've taken a community business case approach, which you could argue for in Michigan as well, and said that if their industry and their community is tourism, and if poverty is so rampant, they won't really be able to have the business that they want. They won't be attracting people to Savannah. So that the business leaders and the community leaders needs to join together to figure out how to reduce poverty. And they actually take the CEOs through a simulated poverty exercise, which, you know, if you want to ask my personal opinion, if you'd asked me about it before, I would have thought it would be hokey and, you know, a little touchy-feely, except it was actually amazing. I went through it. But they have groups, and they work on issues, and they compete with each other to see who can do more about reducing poverty. And it's, again, an example of a community coalition. But the community business case, I think, is really important. Just like businesses don't tend to do anything unless there's a business case, a self-interested reason to want to make an improvement. In this case, we found in the communities that we've worked with Sherman and in our project called When Work Works, is that there's always a community business case for why companies will join together and do something to improve their workforce, workplace, and community.
One last question.
Good afternoon. Ron Hopkins, DC Children's Youth and Best Trust Corporation.
Right.
This is for Fred also. What is, quote unquote, a good wage for an entry-level employee? And if you provided benefits and supports, would you remain profitable without government incentives?
So you want a number in terms of what a good wage is? It's hard. That's a hard question. Our entry wages end up being around the average W-2 ends up being about $25,000, and they get with that all the health benefits, and we have 401k benefits and all that. So I mean is that a wonderful middle class wage? No, but is it a place to start and work on their skills and develop and go forward? I think I'm proud of that. But the idea of looking at jobs as careers and having that ability to move, have that mobility. It's our job as an employer to help them do that. Why wouldn't that be in our best interest? It's in our best interest, and it's also in their interest. We want them to get better. We want them to have higher skills. We are not standing still in our needs from a skill standpoint. We are constantly spending time and energy. I forget the numbers we're spending right now, but it's a fair amount of money per employee that we're spending on improving skills all the time. The imposition of everybody's interfacing with computers. That wasn't true 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Everybody is required to have some understanding of the machinery and so on. All these things are important skill sets that we need to be able to continue to work at. Did I answer that? Not totally.
The government
Profitability.
Can we maintain a profitability? It's tough. It's not easy in today's world. Manufacturing is not in the place it was 20 years ago. That's for sure.
We always stop on time here, but before we finish, and I want to thank our remarkable panelists again, I want to turn things back to Maureen, perhaps just for a minute, if you want to talk about what's to come.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming. I really just want to thank everybody too. I think we'll be having more conversations in this series coming up, and so please do stay tuned. I also want to note that you do have materials on previous conversations, so if you've missed them, they were great, and you can see them online on our website, and there's other materials with them. So thank you all so much for being here, and thanks to our panel.
Please.